Now, as a reminder, despite the temporary truce that we've seen, the war in Gaza continues with no end in sight, and civilians are bearing much of the brunt. Since October 7th, the Hamas attacks across southern Israel, at least more than 1,200 Israelis have been killed, while over 15,000 Palestinians have been killed in Gaza and over 200 killed in the West Bank. John Lyndon joins us on the program now for more. He's the executive director at the Alliance for Middle East Peace. Thank you for joining us, sir. Now, you've been working on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict for over a decade. I'd like to know, have you ever seen the situation as bad as it is now?
No, and nobody, frankly, alive has seen the situation as bad as it is now. It is the most devastating moment for Israelis and Palestinians, really, since 1948. And I think you phrased it very well. It's civilians who are paying the heaviest price. We've had wars before in the Israeli-Arab conflict. We've had intifadas, of course, but we've never had this scale of civilian loss of life, nor this scale of trauma visited on so many people in Israel and Gaza in the West Bank. It's truly unprecedented.
A lot of your focus has been on the role that civil society can play in any lasting resolution. Given the situation as it stands today, do you still have any hope about a role that civil society can play? What can civil society groups more generally offer that governments have clearly thus far failed to bring to the table?
I mean, civil society groups can be the key to breaking the current impasse. I mean, I work with over 170 different NGOs of Israelis and Palestinians, Arabs and Jews, who are building, partnership and equality and a sense of solidarity that can really generate the trust, the ideas, the new leaders that I think everybody has sensed has been needed even before October 7th. And I'm seeing it every day. Israelis and Palestinians turning up and working together in small and big ways. And I think the question of how it can impact the politics is really important. We need to see a diplomatic horizon provided by the international community. And we really need to see a process that can lead toward an end to this conflict. But critically, there needs to be a bottom-up process as well. Trust needs to be rebuilt between both populations, and politicians need to be incentivized to take the sort of risks and moves towards peace that are necessary. And that requires robust civil society working at scale on both sides, within Israel and in Palestine, and cooperating with one another, coordinating their efforts and calling on the international community to take the sort of action necessary. And we would love to see the international community really scale and strengthen those NGOs. They can be the key to really moving into a very different paradigm for Israelis and Palestinians.
Do you think the drive that or the energy that people in these NGOs have to fight for peace has been shattered at all, given the violence that we've seen not only in those attacks in Israel, but also, of course, in Gaza?
Not shattered, but there's certainly been trauma and it's been tested. I mean, many of the victims in both Israel and Palestine of this shocking outbreak of violence have been members of our organizations, our members, and their family members and communities. The kibbutzim in the south of Israel is overrepresented with peace builders. Vivian Silver, a leader within ALLMEP and many of our members, was tragically killed on October 7th. I'm this last few days dealing with members of ours who are trying to get their family out of the Gaza Strip. So they've certainly been tested. But what I've noticed is that by and large, and I don't want to sound naive about this, many, perhaps most, are recommitting to this work. They see the abyss, right? They see what the alternative is. Israeli and Palestinian tragedy and violence, and they understand the only alternative, the only real security can come from partnership and from a real diplomatic agreement. And we've seen new people join, it's important to note. I've had many conversations with people who've lost family members who haven't been peace builders. And since October 7th, they've said things to me like, I'm now committing for the rest of my life to work towards Israeli-Palestinian peace. That's the lesson I'm learning from this trauma.
That is certainly reassuring. Now, lately, the attention has, of course, been focused, understandably, on the October 7th Hamas attacks. But even before October 7th, 2023 was the deadliest year in the West Bank since in decades, really. To what do you attribute the surge in violence that we saw there prior to the October 7th attacks?
I mean, number one, it's the diplomatic inertia and the fact that the conflict remains unresolved, right? And we know that these periods of international inattention or sort of rhetorical support for two states, but no real action on it, it creates a vacuum sometimes where violent actors will fill it. I think the other big dynamic has been settler violence, which has been increasing year upon year. In recent years, we have some quite extreme elements within this current Israeli government who are openly allied with some of the forces in the West Bank who have been visiting violence upon Palestinians. And we've seen an explosion of that violence since October 7th. I mean, you mentioned that last year was the most violent year since the Second Intifada. This year overtook it. And even just since October 7th, we've over 240 Palestinians who've lost their lives in the West Bank. And a troubling number of those are from settler violence, direct engagements from settlers, sometimes with the IDF looking on. And I want to really note this. This should go beyond politics. We welcome statements from the United States, from the European Union, from France, really urging Israel to pay attention to this and to make sure that there is a sense of justice for those that carry out violence against Palestinians in the West Bank. And we also know the Shin Bet, the internal Israeli security agency, has also warned the government of Israel that this settler violence risks tipping things into much further escalation in the West Bank, which, considering what's going on in Gaza, everybody should be trying to avoid.
You mentioned, I did want to talk to you about that settler violence in the West Bank. You mentioned a little bit, or at least suggested why there's been little response from Israeli authorities. But the Palestinian Authority also really seems to be powerless to carry out its own security to prevent attacks on its own residents. Does its government at this point have any power at all?
I mean, they are doing security coordination. They are, according to people I've spoken to, assisting in keeping the situation in the West Bank from fully boiling over. It's important to note that they have lost a lot of legitimacy and credibility in recent years around issues of corruption, but also this lack of a diplomatic vision, right? Like, Palestinians frustrated that the PA doesn't seem to be providing a horizon that will lead to self-determination. And critically, they've lost control in large parts of the northern West Bank. And we saw over the last 24 hours in the city of Jenin, which was the site of a huge military operation this summer in July, more pronounced violence. This is a place where the PA has not really had full control of Jenin for many, many years, really, but most acutely in the last year. And what we've also seen is this disturbing rise of new militias, particularly in the northern West Bank, groups like the Lion's Den, who are attracting young Palestinians towards very radical and violent ideas. And all of this is, I'm not trying to place any culpability on anybody other than those committing acts of violence, but structurally, we have a situation where lost and hopeless and angry young people are being drawn towards terrible ideas. And we need to make sure that we, and I say we as the international community, are providing that diplomatic horizon, are empowering moderate political forces within Palestine and within Israel, and encouraging young people frustrated with this status quo, whether they're Israelis or Palestinians, to invest instead in a non-violent and diplomatic path towards peace and security for both peoples.
Speaking of the diplomatic horizons, then I think we'll finish on this. As far as the latest truce goes, it's likely to be extended. But you think that once Israel gets its hostages back, it will continue its offensive as planned, as many members of its government has suggested it will do. So do you think that these truces can lead to any form of long-term peace?
It's the question. I think what we've noticed in this truce is that the longer the guns are silent for, the more diplomatic bandwidth there is for conversations to take place. I think at the moment, Israel's stated war aims, the removal of Hamas and Hamas not to be the governing authority inside the Gaza Strip, has so far appeared to be something that can only be achieved via military ends, if it can be achieved at all. And I think what's interesting, with Secretary Blinken now arriving in Israel this week and then going to the Gulf for meetings in the UAE, is to test the idea, and I don't know whether this is viable, of whether you can get a version of that diplomatically and non-violently, and whether extending this particular ceasefire to get all of the hostages released, and remember, that is mandated under international law, could also provide the time and the space for diplomatic ideas that would result in Hamas no longer being the governing authority in the Gaza Strip, but maybe doing so without a recommencing of the sort of violence that has plagued the last 7 weeks. That's what we have to see if it's viable.
John Lyndon of the Alliance for Middle East Peace, thank you very much.
Thank you.